Good morning everyone, how you doing? It's Paul here from Unusual Things. Now this morning I have come to Locksbrook Cemetery near Bath, and the reason why we're here today is we've got one for the crime files. Today I'm going to tell you about the murder of two little girls by a gentleman by the name of John Straffen, and he decided one day that he would take the life of Brenda Goddard and Cicely Batstone. Two young girls that had nothing to do with each other, they didn't know each other, but John Straffen decided that he wanted to take their lives. And I will explain to you all why real soon. Now, like I say, this is one for the crime files today. It's a sad story. He is a serial killer. He killed two, possibly three. There is another young girl who I will tell you about real shortly. That one's still open for debate. There's still a lot of issues surrounding that third case, whether it was him that did it or not. Some of the evidence leads to him, and some of it, through eyewitnesses, suggests he didn't. However, he still murdered two young girls. He served a long time in prison until his death, and he was the longest serving prisoner until Ian Brady, of course, for murder. So I'll tell you all about John. Sadly, we don't have too much information. The girls were so young, they didn't really have much of a life, so to speak. But I'll tell you about them as best I can in a moment, and I'll tell you what led to this man with his crimes. Now, usually on the crime files and on these sorts of cases, I try not to focus on the person that's guilty of committing the crimes, and I try to focus more on the victims. But on this case, it's quite young. They're too young in terms of having a life, so to speak. So we have to focus on and tell you the story about this, I don't even want to call him a man, but this person, and try and figure out as best as we can why he did what he did. And then we will go and find the two young girls' final resting place, because they are buried next to each other, and we'll pay our respects to them then. Don't forget, if you like the video today, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't done so already, subscribe to the channel, and of course, leave your comments down below. Have you heard of this case before? Have you heard of the perpetrator? Have you heard of the victims? Let me know your comments. It's one that caught my eye, and I thought I need to go and tell their story, and I need to pay respects to those two girls. So we'll get on now, and I'll tell you some information, and we'll have a look around this beautiful, quite big cemetery.
John Straffen. John Thomas Straffen, 27th of February 1930 to the 19th of November 2007, was a British serial killer who was the longest serving prisoner in British history after killing two young girls in the summer of 1951. He was found unfit to plead at trial and committed to Broadmoor Hospital. In October 1938, Straffen was referred to a child guidance clinic for stealing and truancy. In June 1939, he first came before a juvenile court for stealing a purse from a girl and was given 2 years probation. Straffen's probation officer found that he did not understand the difference between right and wrong, or the meaning of probation. From June 1940, the local council sent Straffen to a residential school for mentally defective children, St Joseph's School in Sanborn, Warwickshire. 2 years later, he moved to Besford Court, a senior school. Straffen was observed as a solitary boy who took correction very badly. At the age of 14, he was suspected of strangling two geese. At the age of 16, the school authorities undertook a review which found his IQ was 64, and his mental age was 9 years 6 months, recommending his discharge. On the 27th of July 1947, a 13-year-old girl reported to police that a boy called John had assaulted her by putting his hand over her mouth and saying, "What would you do if I killed you? I have done it before." This incident was not connected to Straffen at the time. 6 weeks later, Straffen was found to have strangled 5 chickens belonging to the father of a girl with whom he had a row. When arrested, he was also under suspicion for burglary, and in his police interview cheerfully confessed to it and many other incidents to which he had not been connected. Straffen was remanded in custody, and the medical officer of HM Prison Horfield examined him, certifying that he was intellectually disabled. On the 10th of October, he was committed to Hawthorne Colony in Bristol under the Mental Deficiency Act 1913. According to Letitia Fairfield, in the introduction to the Notable British Trials, series volume about Straffen, he had a smouldering hatred and an intense resentment of the police, and blamed them for all of his troubles from the age of 8. On the morning of Straffen's assessment, a young girl named Christine Butcher was murdered. Fairfield speculates that Straffen saw the press coverage that followed and made the connection that strangling young girls gave the maximum amount of trouble to the police. On the 15th of July 1951, Straffen visited the cinema unaccompanied. His route took him past 1 Camden Crescent in Bath, where 5-year-old Brenda Goddard lived with her foster parents. According to Straffen's later statements to the police, he saw Brenda gathering flowers and offered to show her a better place. He lifted Brenda over a fence into a copse, after which she fell and hit her head on a stone. She was unconscious and he strangled her. Straffen did not make any attempt to hide the body and simply continued to the cinema to watch the film Shockproof and returned home. Although Bath police had not previously suspected Straffen was violent, he was considered a suspect in the murder and interviewed by police on the 3rd of August. Meanwhile, the police had visited his employer to check on his movements. This resulted in Straffen being dismissed on the 31st of July. In a later interview with a prison psychiatrist, Straffen said that he knew he was under suspicion and wanted to annoy the police because he hated them for shadowing him. On the 8th of August, Straffen was again at the cinema when he met 9-year-old Cicely Batstone. He first took Cicely to a different cinema to see another film, and then went on the bus to a meadow known as Tumps, on the outskirts of Bath. There he murdered her by strangulation. The circumstances of the crime left many witnesses who had seen Straffen with this girl. The bus conductor recognised him as a former workmate. A courting couple in the meadow had seen him very closely, and a policeman's wife had also seen them together. She mentioned it to her husband when the alarm was raised the next morning. She guided police to where she had seen the two, and Cicely's body was discovered. Her description of the man was enough to identify Straffen immediately as a suspect. Accordingly, the police drove to Straffen's home and arrested him for the murder of Cicely on the morning of the 9th of August. Straffen made a statement admitting he had killed Cicely and also confessed to the murder of Brenda, the other girl. "I did her the same." He was charged with the murder and remanded in custody. On the 31st of August, after a 2-day hearing at Bath Magistrates Court, a date was set for Straffen's trial for the murder of Brenda. On the 17th of October 1951, Straffen stood trial for murder before Mr. Justice Oliver. However, the only witness to be heard was Peter Parks, medical officer at Hallfield Prison, who testified to Straffen's medical history and stated his conclusion that Straffen was unfit to plead. Oliver commented, "In this country, we do not try people who are insane. You might as well try a baby in arms. If a man cannot understand what is going on, he cannot be tried." The jury formally returned a verdict that Straffen was insane and unfit to plead. Straffen was transferred to Broadmoor Hospital in Berkshire. Broadmoor had originally been termed a criminal lunatic asylum, but by the Criminal Justice Act 1948, responsibility for it had transferred to the Ministry of Health, and those committed to it had been renamed patients. In Broadmoor, Straffen was given a job as a cleaner. On the 29th of April 1952, Straffen managed to surmount Broadmoor's 10-foot wall by climbing onto the roof and shed during a work detail. He was wearing civilian clothes under his work clothes. Some hours later, he killed 5-year-old Linda Bowyer, who was riding her bicycle in Farley Hill. He was captured not long after. Linda Bowyer's body was found the next morning. Police questioned Straffen before news reached the hospital, asking him whether he had committed a crime while free. He replied, "I did not kill her." And before police mentioned anything about a bicycle, "I did not kill the little girl on the bicycle." He was charged with the murder of Linda and sent to HMP Brixton while awaiting trial since Broadmoor had failed to hold him. When Straffen's murder trial opened on the 21st of July, he pleaded not guilty, and the defence opted to leave the question of his sanity as an issue to be determined by the jury. At the request of the prosecution, led by the Solicitor General Sir Reginald Maynham Buller, the judge ruled that evidence about the prior murders in Bath would be admissible. That evening, one of the jurors attended the club and declared that one of the prosecution witnesses had murdered Bowyer. The next morning, the judge announced that the jury would be discharged and the trial would be begun with a new jury. The judge required the errant juror to remain in court throughout the trial before calling him to apologise for his wicked discharge of your duties as a citizen. Straffen's defence called several of those who had seen him in earlier years to give evidence about his mental condition. The prosecution then called prison medical officers and psychiatrists to give evidence in rebuttal. Dr. Thomas Monroe, who was a specialist in mental deficiency, had seen Straffen, testified that he had said that to murder was wrong because it was breaking the law and because it was one of the commandments. When Monroe asked Straffen to name the other commandments, Straffen could only remember 4. After retiring for just under an hour, the jury returned with a verdict of guilty, which implicitly declared Straffen sane. Mr. Justice Castle sentenced Straffen to death. Straffen appealed on the grounds that the evidence about the Bath murders were wrongly admitted and that his statements on the morning after Linda's murder were wrongly admitted because they had not been made before he was cautioned. Both grounds for the appeal were dismissed, and Straffen was refused leave to appeal to the House of Lords. The date of the execution of the judgment of death was fixed for the 4th of September. However, the 29th of August, it was announced that Home Secretary David Maxwell Fyfe had recommended to the Queen that Straffen be reprieved. For most of the time that Straffen was in prison, the Home Secretary had to agree to the release of any life sentence prisoner. No occupant of the office was ever willing to let Straffen out. In 1994, Michael Howard decided to compile a select list of about 20 prisoners serving life sentences who must never be released, and Straffen's name was said to be on it. The whole list was published by the News of the World in December 1997. This report confirmed that Straffen would spend the rest of his life in prison. He died at HM Prison Frankland in County Durham on the 19th of November 2007 at the age of 77. He had been in prison for a British record of 55 years, 3 months and 26 days, or a total of 20,206 days.
So there we have all the information about Brenda Goddard and Cicely Batstone, and of course the monster that did it as well. It's a sad, sad case, it really is, and it just goes to show how important it is that, you know, people with mental health issues are monitored and that the authorities get on top of it straight away. They know who's who, what's what, where's where, you know, what meds are on, especially these days. I know things were a bit different back then, but it's no excuse, you know, so we need to think about that. But today's all about the 2 girls, well, 3 girls, but I couldn't find where the 3rd one sadly was buried. So we're going to go and look for the 2 girls' final resting place. And I have, as always, from all of us, bought some flowers for the girls today. So I'll put this on their final resting place when we find it. Okay, it's a big cemetery. I don't have a clue where they are, so I'm literally walking around blind, but I do know that they are buried next to each other, which in itself is really sad, isn't it? But I suppose comforting for the families at the time when the poor girls lost their lives. Anyway, we'll have a look around and then we'll come back on when I find them. Okay, so I literally came off camera then, and as I was walking down, I spotted them straight away. So we'll go and pay our respects now to the 2 girls. Okay, so first of all, we'll come to Brenda, who sadly lost her life first. In loving memory of our darling poster child, Brenda Goddard, who died July 15th, 1951, aged 6. And then over here, Cicely Batstone, who died August the 9th, 1951, aged 9 years. Very sad. Three each. There's a few, Cicely, from all of us. And these are for you, Brenda, from all of us. Bless you both. Hope you're both at peace now. So there we have the final resting place of Brenda C. Goddard and Cicely D. Batstone. Bless them both. Wow. Kids ones are always tough. And one question I constantly get asked is, what's the toughest part about doing what you do? And it's when I have to go and do that. But I'm a great believer in telling their story, sadly, because they were so young, they haven't had much of a life, so I couldn't really give too much information about them. However, what we can do is tell the story of the SOB that did it, and so hopefully throughout time and in society these things don't happen, but they do, don't they, sadly, constantly. It's something that you always see on the news these days, new things happening. Whether or not there's an authority figure involved, the social services or the police or someone, at the end of the day it still happens. But yeah, always a sad one. Anyway, if you liked the video today, please give it a thumbs up and leave your comments down below, won't you? If you've heard of this story before, or was it fresh to you? It's fresh to me when I did the research on it. I hadn't heard of it. So yeah, anyway, I'll see you all in the next one. Take it easy.